Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant. Today I'm going to be covering this book, Prince of Thorns. It's from 2011, so it's about 13, 14 years old. But I picked this up off the shelf at Coas because it has a very similar art style for the cover to some books on my shelf right behind me. Those one's by Brent Weeks. And so I thought, with a similar style, those have been sitting on my bookshelf for 5 years now and I haven't gotten around to them. Probably the longest a book has been on my shelf without me getting around to it. They're a bit thick for fantasy novels though, and so it's hard for me to get that inspiration sometimes. I picked up Prince of Thorns because it's significantly shorter, only about 320 pages long. But it's in a genre that I'm usually not a fan of, and in this case, it kind of proves that right. I don't like very dark fantasy style series, generally speaking, and I feel like a lot of them try too hard to be edgy or problematic in very obnoxious ways. And I think a significant portion of this one, and the reason why I dislike this book, is because a lot of it feels like the main character was designed to be very edgy in the way teenagers are, but when you're pairing that with the style, the dark fantasy style, it just comes off as really gross. And I think a lot of this would have been made better if the ages of various deadlines in the story were increased by a couple years. So we meet him when he's 13 years old, the main character. The name of the main character is Prince Jorg, and I'm getting ahead of myself a bit because I want to cover a couple other things before the rest of the content. The map art is by Andre Ashton. The cover art is by Jason Chan. And this is the Ace Mass Market Edition, August 2012. They're not the same art styles between the two covers, but they are very similar. That hooded appearance, that kind of Weapon Master vibe. This book, Prince of Thorns, opens with following the main character, whose name is Jorg, and is a prince in this setting. And this is why I think it's really too heavy-handed with the dark fantasy and the edgy themes, because it kind of opens in a very similar way, has a lot of the same sins that Iron Wolves has, which is it opens with the characters being incredibly vile, and yet somehow we're supposed to care for them. So Jorg is a 13-year-old boy who thinks of himself as a young man and is in charge of a bandit group. And a couple additional people, some criminals, including a large black man with a pretty heavy crossbow as one of his bandits. And then we also have an old trainer of his who is also a retainer, despite the prince effectively being in exile. And what happens 4 years before the plot is that Jorg's mother and younger brother are killed by his uncle, and his uncle on the mom's side, because the union of his father and his mother kind of unifies two kingdoms in the area, and because they are trying to expand in certain ways, they needed that unity to be broken. Jorg survives, recuperates, but his father has a new queen and she is pregnant, and so he is kind of forced on his way out because the seers, the oracles, predict this to be a son, and as it turns out, it is. And so he needs to prove himself to his father. but he needs to do so before he is a man in his personal goal making, and that is the age of 15 in the setting. But as we see in the opening, he is a sexual creature, so he sexually assaults and rapes and murders because he's a bandit. He kills people, he burns them, he does a lot of vile things, and he is very blatantly just a disgusting and vile human being that we see him going across the countryside from one point to another point. He defeats a lord in battle, though he uses a lot of sabotage to affect that battle. Then he goes back to his father, the king of this land, does some events there, and then goes back out with a mission to take a fortress using only a certain amount of men. And this is effectively a suicide mission, but because the main character, as edgy as he is also a genius, he finds a way to sneak in through a back way and win. And what I don't like is how a lot of this ties into the setting as well, because one of the hallmarks of dark fantasy tends to be a post-apocalyptic or dealing with an end times level threat. So in the Iron Wolves, they staved off that end times level threat, but a new one is coming, and it's bigger and badder, and it opens with the characters already having done great deeds and having to come back out of retirement for their work. You know, it's not quite dark fantasy, but you look at Kings of the Wild, which is very similar, also on my shelf right there. And it's not quite dark fantasy, it's very adventuresome, but has one of those similar things where it's an end times level threat that they need to stop. And then, you know, to go to another one, The Vagrant has a very modern and kind of in decline society where an end times level threat is coming. He has one of the weapons that could turn the tide, and so on and so forth. In the Black Company, dark fantasy, end times level threat, and they're facing it directly. This is one of the dark fantasy styles that I'm usually not a fan of, because end times level threats are just kind of boring to me. I like stuff that is either humble or on a national level, but once things are like people saving the entire world, it kind of bores me. The Black Company does it well because of the character writing, I want to say, more so than anything else, but also has that problem of end times level threat and then progressing an even bigger threat beyond that. So Prince of Thorns is a feudal level story, but within a post-apocalyptic setting. So the apocalyptic event happened long ago. People have picked themselves up after that and are creating entirely new societies. So this isn't explicitly told to you, as any good setting is. You learn it through hints and clues, but that this is a post-nuclear apocalyptic setting. Some of the characters that they meet are affected by generations of nuclear radiation underground. There's also, however, some degrees of magic and mind control. And so it's a mixture of like Earth post-nuclear war, and also magic has resurfaced, and it's not entirely certain how those two intermix. If magic had always existed, how it comes back into existence. There's necromancers and enchanters, but there's not really an explanation for how those two marry. Now, there doesn't necessarily need to be in this book because this is book one in a series, but I guess I just didn't have a good connection to this. It felt like if Jorg was just a bit older, it wouldn't justify his crimes, but it would make it more believable. If you made it so that he was 15 years old and he needed to be 18 or 17 to be accepted as a man in the society, if he was 16 or 15 or 16, you know, close to the end of their growth spurt, close to the end of their growth in general, but still kind of gangly, still growing into it and having all this other stuff around him. I just feel like it suffers because of that major issue with the character, which is that he is too young for everything he does. And it's a complaint I think I have about some of the other books I've read recently as well, where some of the characters are just too powerful and too formulaic in certain ways. Jorg feels formulaic in a more modern way, where characters are young teenagers, they're brilliantly intelligent, they're skilled with the sword, they're incredibly powerful beyond their age, and they live in sin. And this is one of those tropes that I just don't gel with. So Prince of Thorns has a lot of similar flaws to a couple other books that I've discussed recently, including A Broken Blade, where it's too formulaic in certain ways and makes the main character too powerful. And I don't like a lot of those kinds of characters. And Prince of Thorns has that same sin. So this is one of those books where I can very easily see myself putting it back into the used book system, get myself a bit of credit so that I can buy something else. You might enjoy this book more if you prefer dark fantasies, but for myself, it is not something I enjoy. Anyway, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant.